Cameron critique why Britain's former PM is profoundly disappointed with Starmer's immigration shambles. Right, let's get straight to the point, shall we? Picture this. David Cameron, the man who once held the keys to Number 10, sitting in his Cotswold study, watching the news unfold, and feeling what can only be described as profound disappointment. Not anger, not rage, but that particularly British form of dismay that cuts deeper than any shouting match in the Commons. And frankly, who can blame him? We're talking about a government that promised change, promised competence, promised to get a grip on the issues that matter most to ordinary British families. Yet here we are, 8 months into Sir Keir Starmer's tenure, and the small boats crisis isn't just continuing, it's absolutely spiraling out of control. The numbers don't lie, and they are frankly staggering. 28,076 people. That's how many souls have made the treacherous journey across the English Channel in small boats this year alone. Let that sink in for a moment. We're not talking about a minor uptick or seasonal blip. This represents a jaw-dropping 46% increase compared to the same period last year. 46%. Under a Labour government that supposedly had all the answers, that criticised every move Conservatives made on immigration, that promised a more humane, more effective approach. Now, I can almost hear David Cameron's measured tones, that slightly exasperated sigh he gave during particularly trying Prime Minister's questions. Because this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet, though those numbers are genuinely alarming. This is about the fundamental question of whether Britain can control its own borders, whether we can maintain public confidence in our immigration system, and whether political promises mean anything at all in modern British politics. The former Prime Minister, let's remember, faced his own immigration challenges during his time in office. He understood the delicate balance required, the need for compassion combined with firmness, the importance of international cooperation married to national sovereignty. Cameron knew that on immigration, you simply cannot afford to look weak, indecisive, or out of your depth. Yet that's precisely how Sir Keir Starmer appears right now, and it's causing serious people across the political spectrum to question whether this government has any coherent strategy whatsoever. What must particularly grate for someone of Cameron's sensibilities is a sheer lack of narrative coherence from Downing Street. Even Lord Blunkett, and we're talking about a former Labour Home Secretary here, not some Tory backbencher with an axe to grind, has publicly stated that this government hasn't offered a comprehensive answer or an understandable narrative on how to handle the crisis. When your own party's elder statesmen are essentially throwing you under the bus, you know you're in serious trouble. But here's where it gets really interesting, and where Cameron's disappointment likely turns to something approaching bewilderment. The polling data reveals a public that's crying out for leadership on this issue. Immigration consistently tops the list of voter concerns, yet support for Starmer's approach is virtually non-existent. Think about that paradox for a moment. The British public is screaming for action on the issue they care about most, and the government's response has been so inadequate that it's actually managed to unite people in opposition to their handling of it. This is political malpractice of the highest order. Cameron built his career on understanding public opinion, on crafting policies that resonated with ordinary voters while maintaining Britain's international standing. He would never have allowed such a disconnect to emerge between public concern and government action. The very idea would have kept him awake at night, pacing the floors of Downing Street until a coherent response was crafted. Meanwhile, what do we have from Sir Keir? A few tweaks to the asylum appeals process, some speed-up measures that sound impressive in press releases but do precious little to address the fundamental problem. It's the equivalent of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic while insisting that everything's under control, and the ship is sailing smoothly toward its destination. The protests outside asylum hotels across the country tell their own story. These aren't orchestrated political demonstrations. These are genuine expressions of public frustration and concern. Local communities feeling overwhelmed, residents worried about the impact on their areas, taxpayers questioning why their money is being spent housing people in expensive hotels while British families struggle with a cost of living crisis. Cameron would have recognized these concerns immediately and addressed them head-on, because that's what effective political leadership demands. Instead, we have a government that seems determined to wish the problem away through administrative tinkering and procedural adjustments. They are preparing for more legal battles over hotel usage, as if the solution to a political crisis lies in courtroom victories rather than decisive action that commands public confidence. It's the kind of approach that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of both politics and governance. What makes Cameron's disappointment particularly acute is that he knows this didn't have to happen. The infrastructure for managing immigration challenges exists. The legal frameworks are in place. The international relationships necessary for effective cooperation can be built and maintained. What's missing is political will, strategic thinking, and the kind of leadership that puts national interests ahead of ideological posturing. Consider the stark contrast in approach. Cameron's government, whatever its faults, never shied away from making tough decisions on immigration. They understood that public confidence in the system was paramount, that appearing weak or indecisive would only encourage more dangerous crossings, putting more lives at risk in the channel. They grasped the basic political reality that a government seen as unable to control its borders would quickly lose credibility on every other issue. Sir Keir Starmer's team seems to have missed this fundamental lesson entirely. They are operating as if immigration policy exists in a vacuum, as if they can fail spectacularly on the issue that matters most to voters and simply compensate by performing well in other areas. This isn't how politics works, and it certainly isn't how British politics works. The human cost of this governmental failure cannot be ignored. Every boat that successfully crosses the channel sends a signal to people smugglers and their customers that Britain's borders are porous, that our resolve is weak, that the risks are worth taking. The result? More dangerous crossings, more lives put at risk, more families paying criminals for the false promise of easy passage to British shores. Cameron understood that effective deterrence wasn't just about tough rhetoric. It was about consistent, credible action that demonstrated British resolve. When people knew that crossing illegally would not lead to a permanent stay in Britain, fewer attempted the journey. When the message was clear and consistently enforced, the incentive structure changed. This isn't rocket science. It's basic human psychology applied to policymaking. Yet under Starmer's watch, that deterrent effect has completely collapsed. The message being sent across Europe and beyond is crystal clear. Britain is a soft touch, British resolve is questionable, and British promises of consequences are essentially meaningless. This isn't just a policy failure. It's a strategic catastrophe that will take years to reverse. The economic implications alone should horrify any chancellor worth his salt. Housing asylum seekers in hotels cost taxpayers hundreds of pounds per person per night. Multiply that by tens of thousands of people, extended across months and years, and you're looking at expenditure that dwarfs most government departments' annual budgets. This is money that could be invested in schools, hospitals, infrastructure, or any number of priorities that would actually benefit British citizens. But beyond the immediate costs, there's the longer-term economic impact of uncontrolled immigration. When local services become overwhelmed, when housing becomes scarcer, when job markets face unexpected pressures, the ripple effects spread throughout entire communities. Cameron recognized these dynamics and factored them into his policy calculations. He understood that sustainable immigration policy must account for economic capacity as well as humanitarian obligations. The international dimension of Starmer's failure is equally troubling from Cameron's perspective. Britain's relationship with France, crucial for any effective channel strategy, appears to have deteriorated under Labour's watch. Where Cameron invested significant diplomatic capital in building cross-channel cooperation, Starmer seems intent to let these relationships drift while hoping that domestic policy adjustments will somehow solve a fundamentally international problem. This reveals a concerning naivety about how modern immigration challenges actually work. The small boats crisis isn't something Britain can solve unilaterally through administrative reforms and appeals process tweaks. It requires sustained international cooperation, diplomatic investment, and the kind of strategic thinking that Cameron brought to complex policy challenges during his tenure. What's perhaps most damaging to Starmer's position is that it's created the worst possible political situation for himself. His simultaneously failing to control immigration, thus alienating voters concerned about border security, while also failing to provide adequate support and processing for asylum seekers, thus alienating those primarily concerned with humanitarian obligations. This isn't political triangulation, it's political suicide. Cameron's disappointment likely extends beyond policy specifics to questions of basic governmental competence. When a government repeatedly promises action and then fails to deliver measurable results, it erodes public trust not just in that particular administration, but in the entire democratic process. British voters expect their leaders to identify problems, develop solutions, and implement them effectively. When this basic governmental function breaks down, the consequences extend far beyond any single policy area. The timing couldn't be worse for Starmer's credibility crisis. With economic pressures mounting, public services straining, and international tensions requiring steady leadership, Britain needs a government that inspires confidence through decisive action. Instead, we have an administration that appears overwhelmed by challenges that previous governments managed more effectively with far fewer resources and less public attention. Perhaps most troubling of all is the sense that this government doesn't even recognize the severity of its position. Lord Blunkett's criticism wasn't a gentle nudge from a party elder. It was a warning siren about the political dangers of appearing directionless on the issue that matters most to voters. When experienced politicians from your own party start speaking publicly about the need for radical changes in approach, you're not dealing with a temporary setback. You're facing a fundamental crisis of confidence. Cameron built his political career on understanding that effective governance requires more than good intentions and procedural competence. It demands strategic vision, clear communication, and the courage to make difficult decisions even when they are politically uncomfortable. These aren't abstract qualities. They are practical necessity for anyone seeking to lead a modern democratic nation. The small boats crisis has become a perfect laboratory for testing these leadership qualities, and by any objective measure, Sir Keir Starmer is failing the test comprehensively. The numbers continue to rise, public confidence continues to fall, and the government's response continues to focus on peripheral adjustments rather than fundamental reforms. For David Cameron, watching this unfold must feel like observing a masterclass in how not to handle a complex policy challenge. Every mistake the current government makes validates the approaches Cameron's administration developed. Every failure highlights the importance of the strategic thinking that characterized conservative governance during his tenure. The path forward requires exactly the kind of radical thinking that Cameron brought to difficult problems during his time in office. It requires acknowledging that current approaches aren't working, that public confidence has been severely damaged, and that restoring credibility will demand more than administrative tweaks and procedural reforms. Britain deserves better than a government that treats its most pressing challenges as administrative inconveniences rather than fundamental tests of national resolve. The small boats crisis demands serious leadership, strategic thinking, and the courage to implement policies that actually address root causes rather than merely managing symptoms. Until Sir Keir Starmer recognizes these realities and acts accordingly, David Cameron's disappointment will continue to reflect the frustration of millions of British voters who expected more from their government and received far less than they deserved. So there you have it, a government that promised competence and delivered chaos, that pledged control and produced confusion, that sought mandate and achieved meltdown. If you found this analysis compelling, make sure to subscribe to UK Connor for more incisive coverage of British politics that cuts through the Westminster spin. Because in a world of political theatre and manufactured controversy, you deserve analysis that respects your intelligence and delivers the truth. Hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and join the conversation that's shaping Britain's political future.